After my divorce, my parents asked me and my kids to move in, but when my brother had a baby, my kids were pushed into the basement so his family could take over. We moved out that same day. I'm 35, and until 2 years ago, I thought I had my life figured out. Then my marriage fell apart, and suddenly I found myself packing up my 10-year-old twins, Maya and Caleb, trying to figure out where we'd go next. My parents offered their house without hesitation. "Come stay with us," Mom said over them, her voice warm with, "You and the kids can have the upstairs bedrooms. It'll be perfect while you get back on your feet." At the time, it felt like a blessing. Dad even helped me move our furniture, and they seemed genuinely excited to have their grandchildren around. The first few months were actually wonderful. The kids adapted well to their new school, and I loved coming home from 12-hour shifts to find them doing homework at the kitchen table while made dinner. It felt like family in the best possible way. But I should have paid more attention to the small comments, the little signs that should have warned me what was coming. "You know, honey," Mum would say while folding laundry, "maybe you should consider dating it. You're not getting any younger, and the kids need a father figure." Or Dad would mention how my younger brother Dean was really making something of himself at his marketing, always with this tone that suggested I wasn't quite measured. Dean had always been the golden child. 3 years younger than me, he'd coasted through college while I worked 2 jobs to pay for nursing. When he graduated, our parents helped him with the down payment. When I graduated, they gave me a card with $50 in. But I'd made peace with that years ago, I thought. The twins seemed happy enough. They loved having their grandpa. I was grateful. I was working overtime whenever possible, squirreling away money in a savings account. The plan was to stay maybe 6 months, just long enough to build up a solid financial cushion and find the right place for us. What I didn't realize was that my parents had gotten comfortable with the arrangement too. Very comfortable. "There's no rush," Mum would say whenever I mentioned looking at apartments. "Why pay rent when you're helping us out here? And the kids love it." It was true that they seemed to love it. Caleb had found a group of friends in the neighborhood who played basketball at the community, and Maya had joined the school choir. For the first time since the divorce, they seemed settled. I started keeping a notebook where I tracked our expenses and savings goals, writing down every detail of our progress toward independence. It became a small ritual updating those numbers each week, proof that we were building something solid. The kids would sometimes peek over my shoulder and ask about the calculation, and I'd explain how we were saving for our own place, our own fresh start. What I couldn't have predicted was how dramatically everything would change when Dean called with his big news. I remember exactly where I was standing in the kitchen. He made the announcement would shift the entire balance, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The call came on a Tuesday eve. I was helping Caleb with it, and Mum proudly flew across the kitchen, lit up in a way I hadn't seen. The excitement in "Tell me again." She grabbed, pulling him a baby. Oh my goodness. When I watched my pacing, grinning on the lottery. Mom was crying, happy tears, asking a million questions about due dates and doctor appointments. Maya and Caleb looked up from their homework, curious about all the commotion. "Your Uncle Dean and Aunt Nora are having a baby," I explained, and they seemed pleased enough. They liked their uncle, though they didn't see him very often since he lived across town with his wife of 2 years. What I didn't anticipate was how completely this pregnancy consumed my parents' world. Within a week, Mum had purchased 3 pregnancy books and started calling Nora daily to check on morning sickness symptoms. Dad began researching baby gear with the intensity he'd once reserved for buying cars. Every conversation somehow circled back to the coming grandchild. "This is different," Mum confided to me one evening while we were cleaning up dinner. "Don't get me wrong, I love Maya and Caleb dearly, but I was working full-time when they were babies. I barely got to enjoy their early years the way I should have. This time I'll be retired. I really be present." I felt a strange twist in my stomach. She'd been present for my kids in her way, but I understood this would be her first grandchild, the doting grandmother. Career demand. The changes started small. The weekly dinner outing with the twins became less frequent because Nora needed Mom to drive her to doctor. The Saturday morning pay tradition got skipped. When Dad started assembling a crib he'd bought months before even need it. Grandma's just excited. I told the kids when they asked why she's distracted, but privately I was starting to feel like becoming background players in our own living. By the time baby Elijah was born in October, the house had already been. The dining room that the twins had used for art projects and homework became a nursery, complete with a changing station rocking chair and more baby supplies than any one child could possibly need. The good dishes got moved down to the basement to make room for bottles, formula, and this whole elaborate sterilizing setup. I will never forget holding Elijah for the first time, this tiny perfect person with Dean's dark hair and Nora's nose. He was beautiful, and I loved him right away. But watching my parents with him felt like watching people I had never met before. They were completely and utterly enchanted. "Look at those fingers," Dad whispered, letting Elijah grip his thumb. "He's going to be so smart, I can tell already." Mum could not put him down. She would cancel plans with friends just to babysit whenever Dean and Nora wanted a date night. She learned about sleep schedules and feeding routines with the kind of dedication you would expect from someone studying for final exams. The twins were sweet about their new cousin, but I could see them noticing the shift in attention. One night, Caleb asked me why Grandma and Grandpa seemed to love Elijah more than them. They don't love him more, I told him, though honestly, I was not entirely sure myself. They're just excited because he's a baby. Remember how excited everyone was when you and Maya were born. But even as I said it, I knew it was not quite the same thing. Christmas that year was when everything became impossible. I had spent weeks carefully budgeting for presents, making sure the twins would still have a magical morning, despite everything we had been through. I got them each a bike, some art supply, and books from their wish list. But when Christmas morning came, the difference was stunning. Elijah, who was barely 2 months old and could not even focus his eyes properly, had presents piled around him like he was royalty. A high-end stroller that cost more than I made in a week, designer clothes he would outgrow in a month, toys meant for kids years older than him. Maya and Caleb each got one small gift from their grandparents, a $20 gift card to a bookstore. Books are important, Mum said cheerfully when she saw the look on my... We want to encourage their reading. Meanwhile, she was unwrapping Elijah's 16th present, an electronic baby monitor system with video and a smartphone app. The twins handled it with more grace than I did. They thanked their grandparents politely and seemed genuinely excited to pick out new books. But I watched Caleb's face while Dad spent 20 minutes setting up Elijah's bouncy, going on about how's it feature with brain development. Mom, Maya whispered to me later, while everyone was fussing over Elijah's first Christmas. Why did Elijah get so many presents and play with them? I did not have a good answer. The comments kept getting more pointed too. Mom started suggesting maybe I should do something different with my hair, that I looked tired all the time, that I should think about wearing makeup. She had never criticized my appearance before, but suddenly everything about me seemed to invite some kind of improvement. You know, if you dressed up a little more, you might meet someone, she would say while we folded laundry. Nora always looked so put together, maybe you could ask her for advice. Dad started questioning my parenting more openly too. When I told Caleb no to expensive basketball shoes, Dad would mutter about how kids need to feel confident, have the right equipment. When I enforced bedtime rule, he would suggest I was being too strict, that childhood was supposed to be fun. But the most painful part was watching how they treated the twins compared to Elijah. With my kids, they were loving but practical grandparents, helping with homework, driving to soccer practice, showing up for school plays. But with Elijah, they were completely besotted. Every sound he made was brilliant. Every little expression was remarkable. He smiled, Mum would practically shriek, calling everyone over to witness as really just gas. Did you see that, she would say. He's so advanced for his age. I started taking the twins out more on weekends, just the three of us. We would go to the movies or the children's museum, anywhere that felt like our own space. I would watch other families and wonder if what we were dealing with was normal. This constant feeling of being evaluated and coming up short in what was supposed to be. I like it when it's just us, Caleb told me one Saturday he had spent at the park. We were sitting on a bench sharing ice, and he seemed more relaxed than in weeks. Me too, buddy, I said, ruffling his hair. Why do you like it? Because you're not sad when it's just us. That hit me harder than I expected. I had not realized how transparent my frustration had become, how much the kids were picking up on the tension I thought I was hiding. That night I updated my savings note with renewed. We finally had enough for a security deposit and first month's rent on a decent apartment. The original plan had been to stay until spring to build up even bigger, but I was starting to wonder if the emotional cost was worth the financial benefit. I just did not realize yet how much worse things were about to get. The announcement in February, almost 2 years after we had moved in with. I was getting ready for work when I could hear the stress in his voice right away. Hey sis, is Mom there? He asked, frazzled, which was unusual. My normally composed brother. Mom took the phone eagerly like she always did but her expression shifted quickly from delight to concern to determination. Of course, sweetheart, whatever you need, she said. How long do you think the renovation will? I paused, packing my work bag, trying to piece together the conversation from her side of it. 6 to 8 weeks. That's not too. Yes, of course you can stay here. There's plenty of room. My stomach dropped. I walked closer, trying to catch Dad, but he was already nodding along, supportive, mentally rearranging furniture. What renovation? After Mum hung. Oh, Dean and Nora need to stay here for a while, said breezily, like this was the most natural thing in the world. They're having some work done on their house. Something about water dam in the kitchen and bathroom. The whole place needs to be gutted for 6 to 8 weeks, maybe longer depending on how the work goes. You know how these things can drag on. Dad was already pulling out a notepad, making lists. We'll need to move some things around, make sure everyone's comfortable. What struck me most was that none of them seemed to think this needed any kind of discussion. I had been living there with my kids for almost 2 years, chipping in on groceries and utilities, helping out with the house and taking care of things for my parents. But the decision to bring in 3 more people, including a baby, got made without so much as a heads up to me. Where exactly are they going to sleep? Trying to keep my voice steady. Well, they'll take the guest room, obviously, and we'll turn the den into a nursery for Elijah, Mum said, already sliding into planning mode. It'll be lovely having everyone under one roof, like a real family compound. The guest room was where I kept the twins' old clothes and seasonal stuff. The den was where the kids did homework and played video games on rainy afternoons. In one phone call, our living space had just gotten a whole lot smaller. When are they moving in? I asked. This weekend, Dean wants to get started on the renovation right away. This weekend. 3 days notice for a living situation that would last at least 2 months. That evening, I sat the twins down and explained everything. They handled it better than I did, honestly. They seemed kind of excited about having baby Elijah around more. Kids adapt in ways adults forget how. But I was running numbers in my head, and the numbers were not good. 7 people in a 4-bedroom house. One of them a baby who would be up at all hours. 1 bathroom upstairs, 1 downstairs. A kitchen that already felt cramped trying to get ready for. It'll be fine. Updating my savings. It's temporary. I started looking at rental listings more seriously, saving the ones that looked promising. Prices had gone up over the past year, but it was still doable. The only question was whether to wait until spring like I'd planned, or start looking sooner. "Mum, are you okay?" Maya asked from my bedroom doorway, catching me scrolling apartment websites on my laptop. "Just looking at some options for us," I said, patting the bed so she'd sit next to me. "How would you feel about having our own place again?" She thought it over seriously, the way she thought about most things. "I like living with Grandma and Grandpa, but sometimes I miss when it was just us 3. What do you miss about it?" "I don't know. It was quieter, I guess. And you seemed happier." Out of the mouths of babes. I kissed the top of her head and shut the laptop. "We'll figure it out." But even as I said it, I already knew the next 2 months were going to push me to my limit. The invasion started Saturday morning. Dean showed up with a U-Haul, and Nora came in carrying Elijah like they were refugees escaping a disaster, not people who'd chosen on a whim to gut their perfectly good kitchen. Within a few hours, the house turned into something I barely recognized. The guest room filled up with their furniture, clothes, and enough baby gear to stock a small store. The den became Elijah's territory, a crib, changing station, and play area taking over the space where the twins used to spread out their. But it was the rules that really got on. Rules that showed up immediately with zero discussion. "We'll need to keep the noise down during Elijah's naps," Nora announced, while unpacking what looked like the 15th box of baby clothes. "He's very sensitive to sound, and his sleep schedule matters a lot for his development." Elijah napped 3 times a day for stretches that seemed to shift around based on some mysterious baby logic only Nora understood. "Also, we should probably clear most of the toys out of the living room," she added, giving the twins' books and art supplies a look like they offended her. "Babies put everything in their mouths, and I'm worried about choking hazards." Within the first week, Maya and Caleb had basically lost access to most of the common areas in the house. No TV in the living room, it might wake Elijah. No playing in the den, that was his nursery now. No arts and crafts at the kitchen table. Baby stuff covered every inch of. "Why don't you kids play in your rooms?" Mum suggested cheerfully when Caleb complained about being bored. Their rooms were small, made for sleeping. Not the kind of active play 10-year-olds actually need, but somehow pointing that out made me the unreasonable one. The TV situation was especially maddening. The twins had always been allowed to watch their shows once homework was done, but now even that got complicated. "Could you turn that down?" Nora would call from upstairs, even when the volume was barely audible. "Elijah is trying to sleep." Or Dean would wander into the living room and switch the channel without asking, claiming he wanted to catch the news, leaving Maya and Caleb just staring at him, confused. "Can we finish our show?" Maya asked, politely one evening. "This is important," Dean said, not even looking at her. "You can watch cartoons anytime." I watched my kids' faces and saw them figuring out that what they wanted or needed mattered less than whatever an adult felt like doing, and that their comfort in what had been their home for 2 years now came second to a baby's nap schedule and their uncle's TV preference. The real breaking when Mum announced we'd need to reorganize the twin stuff because Elijah was getting more mobile and might get into more mobile. He's 6 months old. He can barely sit up. Nora says he's very advanced for his age. We need to be proactive about safety. So the twins' art supplies got pushed up onto high shelves they couldn't reach on their own. Their books got moved into their bedrooms to make room for more baby gates and safety. Their drawings came down off the fridge to make space for Elijah's feeding chart and doctor appointment reminder. I watched my kids adjust to all of it, with a kind of grace that just broke me inside. Complaining, no tantrum, no fighting to get their space back. They just quietly went along with mattering less, with their needs being less important. "It's okay, Mum," Caleb told me, when I apologized for cancelling plans again because Elijah was having a rough day. I understand, but they shouldn't have had to understand anything. They were kids, and this was supposed to be them too. That night, I got out my savings and ran them. I had enough now, more than enough, honestly. 2 years of saving had left me with a bigger cushion than I'd ever had. It wasn't really a question anymore of whether we could afford to leave. It was a question of whether I could afford to keep staying. The real turning point happened in early April, though I didn't see it that way in the moment. Caleb had come down with a spring cold that set off his asthma, something he'd struggled with since he was little. I'd called his prescription into the pharmacy and was heading out to grab it when Dad stopped me in the kitchen. $47 for an inhaler, holding up the automated text alert. Seems like a lot. "Are you sure he needs the name brand?" I just stared at him. "It's his rescue inhaler, Dad. The generic doesn't work as well for him, and his doctor specifically wrote it for this one. But $47, he said again, like I hadn't heard. Maybe you should ask the doctor about other options. This was happening at the same kitchen table where 2 days earlier I'd watched him unbox a $400 high chair for Elijah, a baby who wouldn't even eat solid food for another month. That high chair's different, Mom said, and I brought contradiction. That was a gift, and it's the kind of thing that lasts for years. Caleb's inhaler is also the kind of thing that lasts, I said quietly. It lasts as long as he keeps breathing. But somehow I was the unreasonable one again. Piano lessons were next on the chopping block. Maya had been taking lessons for a year and a half, and she was genuinely good at it. Her teacher, Mrs. Whitfield, came by every Tuesday at 4, and Maya looked forward to it all day long. I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitfield, but we're going to have to pause lessons for a while. The piano's disrupting the baby's nap. Maya's whole face fell. She'd been working on a piece for the spring recital, something she'd been excited about for weeks. Maybe we could move the lessons to a different time, I suggested. Mrs. Whitfield's booked up otherwise, Mum said, brushing it off. And honestly, piano's a luxury. Maya can always pick it back up later. Later. It was always later. Everything that mattered to my kids could wait. But Elijah's schedule was untouchable. The last straw was the refrigerator. The twins had been putting their schoolwork on the fridge since they were old enough to hold a crayon. It was a tradition, our way of celebrating what they'd made and accomplished. But I came home from a rough shift at the hospital one day and found the whole fridge rearranged. Every one of Maya and Caleb's drawings, their honor roll certificate, their school pictures, all taken down and stuffed into a folder that Nora had thoughtfully set on top of the fridge would ever see it. The whole front of the fridge was now covered with Elijah's feeding schedule, his growth chart, his shot records, and about 15 photos of him doing normal baby stuff, lying on a blanket, drooling. It looks so much cleaner this way, Nora said, when she caught me staring at the empty spots where my kids' achievements used to be. And it's easier to track Elijah's stuff. I took the folder down off the fridge and looked through it. 2 years of my children's pride and hard work, reduced to clutter that needed hiding. Where should I put these? Holding up a drawing Maya made of our family. Maybe their rooms, Nora suggested, or you could start a scrapbook. That night, once everyone else had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and started really looking at rental. Not just browsing anymore, actually running the numbers on utilities, picturing in my head how our furniture would fit in different layouts. I found a duplex about 15 minutes from the kids' school. Small backyard, 2 bedrooms upstairs. Rent was manageable, and the landlord sounded reasonable when I called about the application. When would you want to move in? He asked. I looked around the kitchen at the fridge covered in someone else's priorities, at the high chair that cost more than my kids' medicine, at all the proof of how completely we'd been pushed out of what was supposed to be our own temporary home. How soon is too soon? I could have it ready by the 1st of May if you can pass the credit check and give me some reference, he said. May 1st was 3 weeks out. I'll get back to you tomorrow. My heart already going a mile a minute with fear and excitement. For the first time in months, I remembered what it felt like to actually make a decision about my own life. I didn't tell a soul about the call with the landlord. Instead, I did what I always do when I need to think straight. Went to work and talked to Renee. Renee was my closest friend at the hospital, a woman in her 40s who'd raised 3 kids basically on her own and had this way of cutting straight through emotional mess with surgical precision. We'd worked together 5 years and she knew enough about my family situation to ask the right question. So let me get this straight, she said. Over lunch, I told her about the fridge thing. Your parents had you move in temporarily, and now they've basically handed your living space over to your brother's family, and you're supposed to just go along with it. It's more complicated than I started. But she put her hand up. Is it though? You pay rent there. I chip in on expenses. Yes. You help with the housework, cooking, taking care of your parents. And your kids have been perfect house guests for 2 years, doing chores, being polite, never causing trouble. I nodded, seeing exactly where she was headed. So you're a tenant, a caretaker, and a daughter, but somehow you don't get a say in decisions that directly affect your own children's happiness. Hearing her say it out loud made it sound even worse than I'd realized. What would you do? I asked her. I'd get the hell out, she said. No hesitation at all. Life's too short to teach your kids they don't matter. That afternoon I called the landlord back and filled out the application. Good credit, solid work history, strong references. By the end of the week, I'd signed the lease and put down the deposit. The duplex was perfect for us. Hardwood floors all through. Big windows letting in tons of light. A kitchen where we could actually eat breakfast without stepping around baby gear. The bedrooms were small but felt cozy, and there was a basement where the kids could play on rainy days without worrying about waking anybody up. I got the utilities scheduled, looked into internet providers, even bought this little star-shaped magnet for the fridge picturing Maya's drawings hanging up in our new kitchen. The hardest part was keeping it all quiet. Every single day I watched my kids adjust to more restriction, watched them get quieter, more careful, watched them learn to take up less room. And every day I reminded myself in just a few they'd get their voices. You okay, Mom? Caleb asked one, catching me staring out with what must have been a strange look on. I'm planning something good for. What kind of something? It's a surprise, but I think you'll like it. That seemed to satisfy him, though I could still see the curiosity sitting in his eyes. These kids had already been through enough upheaval for one lifetime. They deserved some stability, but they also deserved a home where they actually mattered. I started grabbing moving boxes on my lunch breaks and stashing them in my car trunk. Looked into moving companies, got quotes for a local updated my address with the bank and with the kids' school. Getting ready for a transfer I hoped would go smoothly. The hardest part was the timing. I needed to tell my family about them, but I wanted to wait until everything was locked in, until there was no chance of them talking me out of it, or stirring up drama that would upset the kids. My plan was to tell them on a Saturday morning when everyone would sit down. It was time we had our own, that this had been the plan. Or what I did not plan was how fast everything would blow up. Ever got that? Looking back now, I should have known that packing 7 people into one house with that much tension and lopsided priorities was basically sitting on a powder keg, but I figured I had a few more weeks to plan a smooth exit. I thought I was in control of the timeline. I was wrong. The emergency hit while I was halfway through a 12-hour shift at the hospital. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was checking on a 6-year-old patient recovering from an appendix surgery when my phone started buzzing non-stop with texts from the twins. Maya's first message was pretty calm. "Mum, Grandma says we need to move our stuff to make room for something. Can you call when you get a break?" But then Caleb's messages started coming in fast, and they told a very different story. "Mum, they're moving all our stuff. They put our clothes in garbage bags. Grandma says we have to sleep in the basement now." Maya's crying. "Can you please come home? They won't let us call you." My hands were shaking reading those. I stepped into the supply closet to call home. Straight to voicemail. Tried again, same thing. I found my supervisor and gave her the short version, family emergency, had to leave right now. She took one look at my face, didn't ask a single question, just told me to go. The drive home felt like it lasted forever. I kept calling the house phone, kept getting voicemail, which meant somebody was choosing not to pick up. Called Dean's cell, voicemail. Called Nora's cell, voicemail. Finally Maya answered her own phone, whispering. "Mum, they moved us to the basement," she said, and I could hear she'd been crying. "They said Elijah needs our rooms because the nursery upstairs is too small and babies need more space than big kids do." "Where's everyone else?" I asked, taking the corner onto our street faster than I should have. "Downstairs helping move stuff." "Mum, the basement's really humid and it smells weird and there's bugs." I pulled into the driveway and saw exactly what I'd been afraid of. Dean's truck was sitting there, and through the living room window I could see him hauling the twins' dresser toward the basement stairs, moving their furniture without asking me, without even waiting till I got home from work. I walked into my parents' house and found this whole organized chaos. Mum was directing traffic like a general, telling people where furniture, which clothes could stay upstairs, and which needed to go down to the basement. Dad was lugging the twins, being uncomfortable, still going along with it. Nora was standing in what used to be Maya's ring the window new curtain, while Elijah napped in his travel. "What the hell is going on here?" My voice coming out louder than, "Oh, you're home early, Mum." Like this was all completely. We decided to reorganize it while the kids were at school. Elijah really needs more room, and the basement will be perfect for Maya and Caleb. It's basically like their own little apartment down there. I went downstairs to see what they'd done to my kids' space. The basement was damp, dim, smelled like mildew. Even with Dad running a dehumidifier down there, they'd crammed the twins' beds into one corner, and the whole thing looked more like storage than a bedroom. This is not coming back up. You cannot just move children into a basement without even talking to their mother about it. "It's temporary," Dean said, not looking at me. "Just till we finish the renovation on our plate." "Your renovation was supposed to take 6 weeks. It's been 3 months." "These things take time," Nora said, bouncing Elijah, who'd just woken up. "And honestly, the kids are getting older. They need to learn to be flexible." Flexible. That's what they were calling it. My 10-year-olds giving up their bedrooms, their space, their dignity, so a baby could have more room to crawl. "Pack your things," I told Maya and Caleb, who were standing at the bottom of the basement stairs looking completely lost. "We're leaving tonight." "Leaving?" Mum looked genuinely stunned. "What do you mean leaving?" "I mean we're moving out tonight. This isn't working." "Don't be ridiculous. Where would you even go? You can't just pack up with no plan." That's when it hit me. They actually believed I was helpless, that I had no options besides just accepting whatever they decided was best for it. They'd gotten so used to treating me like some dependent teenage, forgotten I was a 35-year-old professional with my own resources. "I have a plan," calm as I could manage. "I've had one for weeks." The room went dead quiet. Even Elijah's fussing. "What kind of plan?" Mom asked, and I could hear a little crack of uncertainty in her voice for the first time. "The kind where my children get their own bedrooms and don't have to live in a basement like they're refugees in their own family." "You're overreacting," Dean said, though he didn't sound nearly as sure of himself as usual. "It's just temporary." "Nothing about this has been temporary. Your 6-week renovation turned into 3 months, and now you're taking over the whole upstairs of the house. Meanwhile, my kids lose their space, their activities, any sense of home, and I'm just supposed to accept it because Elijah needs room to grow." I looked at each one of them. Did any of you even ask the twins how they felt about moving to the basement? Did it occur to anybody that 10-year-olds deserve basic dignity and comfort? "They're resilient," Nora said. "Kids adapt. Kids shouldn't have to adapt to being treated like second-class citizens in their own home." I walked over to Maya and Caleb, still standing there looking confused by all the sudden chaos. Go upstairs and pack up anything that matters to you, I told them. Clothes, books, anything you don't want to leave behind. We're staying somewhere else tonight. Where? Maya asked. I'll figure it out, but not here. While the twins went upstairs, the family meeting I'd been planning for weeks happened anyway, just not on my turn. You cannot be serious about us, Mom said. We're family. Family doesn't move kids into a basement without asking their mother. Family doesn't cancel a child's music lessons because a baby needs quiet. Family doesn't take down kids' artwork to make room for a feeding. We've been trying to accommodate everyone. No, you've been accommodating Dean and Nora and Elijah. My kids have been the ones expected to accommodate everybody else. Dean finally looked straight at me. So what? You're just gonna storm out like a drama queen, hurt Mum and Dad's feelings because you can't handle a little inconvenience. Inconvenient. Something in me just snapped. Watching my children learn that their needs don't matter is not an inconvenience, Dean. It's damaging, and I'm not letting them learn that lesson just because their uncle and aunt can't sort out their own housing. That's not fair, Nora said, holding Elijah tighter. We didn't ask for water damage. No, you didn't ask for it. You sure took advantage of. Your 6-week emergency were full takeover of my kids' home. The twins came back down with their backpacks and a couple bags of clothes. They looked scared, but they looked determined too, trusting me to figure out whatever came next. Where will you go, Mom? And for the first time, she actually sounded worried instead of annoyed. We'll stay with my friend Renee tonight, I said, already pulling out my phone to text her. And after that, we'll figure it out. This is ridiculous. You're making a huge deal over nothing. I looked at him, standing there holding his son in the house up, surrounded by his furniture, his wife, and his total confidence. Keep Ben. The mistake, I said quietly, was thinking my kids and I could ever be anything convenient. I helped the twins load their things. My parents stood in the drinking, stunned that their easygoing daughter had suddenly grown a backbone. Call us when you're to your sense, Mum said as I buckled. I'll call you when to yours. As we drove off, Caleb asked, are we really not to live there? Is that okay with you? Real serious. I didn't like the basement. It was scary. I know, buddy, you will never have to sleep down there again. And for the first time in months, that felt like a promise I could actually. Renee had the door open before I even knocked. She'd gotten my panicked text on the drive over. She took one look at our bags and the kids' quiet faces and pulled us inside without asking a single question. The guest room has bunk beds, she told Maya and Caleb. My kids are at their dad's this weekend, so you'll have all the space. You guys hungry? While the kids got settled and Renee made sandwiches, I called the landlord about the duplex. Even though we weren't supposed to move in for another 2 weeks, I asked if there was any chance of getting in sooner. Actually, the last tenant moved out early, he said. I could have it ready by Monday if that works. Utilities are already hooked up. Monday was 4 days out. 4 days I could handle. The rest of that weekend went by in a blur of phone calls and errands. I lined up a moving truck, called the twins' school about transferring their records, went and picked up basic household stuff. Renee's kids got home Sunday night and immediately took Maya and Caleb in like temporary siblings, which made the whole thing feel less like a crisis and more like some kind of adventure. Your mom's really brave, I overheard Renee's daughter telling Maya while they played board games. Why? Because she picked you guys over everything else. That's what brave people. Monday morning came quicker than I expected. The moving truck pulled up to my parents' place at 8 a.m. and I braced myself for what I knew was be a rough conversation. Mom answered the door looking like she hadn't slept much. You're really doing this, she said. Not really a question. I really am. Where are you moving to? She asked, and I gave her the duplex address, watching her face shift as it hit her that I hadn't been bluffing about having a plan. How long have you been planning this? Dad asked, showing up behind her. Since it became clear my kid's well-being mattered less to you than my brother's convenience. Dean came out of the kitchen holding Elijah, looking rumpled. So you're really going to punish all of us because you didn't like some housing arrangement? I'm not punishing anybody, pointing the movers toward the stairs. I'm protecting my kids. What happened next caught everyone off guard, me included. As the movers carried our stuff out, Nora started crying. I didn't know, she said, bouncing Elijah nervously. I didn't realize the kids were this upset about everything. I thought they were fine with the changes. For a second, I almost felt bad for her. She was young, drowning in new motherhood, and probably genuinely never thought about how her demands were landing on everyone else. The kids seemed fine with the changes because they're good kids who've been raised to be polite and go along with things, I said. But being fine with something and actually being happy about it are two completely different things. Maybe we could figure something out, Mum said, sounding desperate. Rearrange things. Give everybody more room. It's too late for that. This was never really about the basement or the bedroom. It's about the fact that for 3 months you all made decisions in my kids' lives without ever asking, and you genuinely don't get why that's a problem. We were just trying to help everybody. You were helping Dean and Nora. My kids were the ones expected to deal with the inconvenient. As our things disappeared into the truck, I watched my family wrestle with the fact that their plans had never included my say in any of it, and that I wasn't willing anymore to just go along with arrangements I'd never actually agreed to. What about Sunday dinners? Will you still come for Sunday dinners? I looked at her standing in the doorway of the house where my kids had learned to make themselves smaller, quieter, less important. I'll think about it, I said. The drive to our new place took 15 minutes. 15 minutes from the house where we'd been unwelcome guests to a place where we'd finally be a family again. As we pulled into the driveway of the duplex, Maya said, "It looks like a real house." "It is a real house," I told her. "It's our house." That night, after we got the bed set up and unpacked the basics, the three of us sat on the living room floor eating pizza and making plans, real plans, for our own space, our own rules, our own lives. "Can I put my drawings on the fridge?" Maya asked. "You can put your drawings anywhere you want," I said. "This is your home too." Caleb went quiet for a long while, then said, "Mom, I'm proud of you." "Why?" "Because you picked us." And that right there was exactly why leaving had been the only choice that ever made sense. 6 months after we moved out, my whole life looked different, and honestly, so did I. The twins had settled into their new school beautifully, making friends and joining activities that didn't have to get scheduled around somebody else's nap time. Maya was back at piano lessons. Caleb joined the school basketball team. Even more surprising, I got promoted to charge nurse at the hospital. The confidence I'd found in finally standing up for my kids seemed to bleed into every other part of my life too. I was speaking up in meetings, taking on leadership stuff, making decisions of clarity you only get once. We bought a house, not renting anymore. An actual small 3-bedroom with a fenced backyard where the kids could play without worrying about how much noise they made. The mortgage was manageable, and for the first time in years I felt like we were actually building something solid and permanent. The twins were thriving in ways I hadn't even expected. Louder, more confident, way more willing to take up space in the world. It was like pulling them out of an environment where they'd learned to shrink themselves, let their real personalities bloom back out. Meanwhile, my parents' calls got more and more desperate. It started about 2 months after we left. Mum calling to tell me Dean and Nora's renovation was running way longer than expected, and they'd probably be staying at the house indefinite. How is that my problem? Genuinely curious what her answer would even be. "It's not your problem," dead fast. "I just figured you'd want to know, family news." But the calls kept coming. Dad telling me Dean was stressed about renovation costs. Mom mentioning Nora was struggling to adjust to life with the baby and could use more help. Little hints dropped in that maybe I could come around more, help out the way I used to. I visited exactly once, for my dad's birthday in September. The house felt smaller and more chaotic than I remembered. Dean looked wiped out, Nora seemed overwhelmed, and my parents looked like they'd aged 5 years in 6 months. The twins looked great. Watching Maya and Caleb play in the backyard they seemed so confident. They are confident. Kids do better when they feel secure and valued. We always valued sounding. "Did you?" I asked, because I remember Elijah getting a $400 high check. We were questioning whether Caleb even needed his asthma. The visit was awkward but civil enough. Dean barely said 2 words to me. Nora was polite but kept her distance, and my parents seemed to be tiptoeing around everything. But what really got me was how fast the twins slipped back into being quieter and more careful the second they were in that house. Like some part of them still remembered they were supposed to be smaller versions of themselves then. "Can we go home now?" Maya asked after about 2 hours. "This used to be your home too," Mum said, sounding sad. "No," Maya said, with that blunt 10-year-old honesty. "This was just where we lived for a while." The really interesting part started in October. Renee heard it through the hospital grapevine first, then it made its way around town after that. Dean and Nora were getting divorced. Turned out the stress of living with his parents, on top of the money pressure from the renovation, and Dean's general inability to handle grown-up responsibility without someone else managing every little had wrecked their marriage. Nora filed for divorce and moved back in with her own parents, taking Elijah with her. "He's devastated," Mum told me on one of her more and more frequent calls. "He really thought they could work it out." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. Divorce is hard, especially with kids involved. "Thing is," Mum went, "he's having trouble managing it all on his own. The renovation, his work schedule, the custody stuff with Elijah. He could really use some help." And there it was, the actual reason. "What kind of help?" "Well, you were always so good at organizing, handling the logistics. Maybe you could help him sort out his finances or drive him to some meetings with the lawyers and contractors." I went quiet, long enough that she said my name twice just to check I was still on the line. "Mum," I finally said, "do you remember what happened 6 months?" "That was different," she said quickly. "That was about living arrangements. This is family helping family." "Family," I repeated. "Like when my family helped me by moving my kids into a basement. That kind of help. You're never gonna forgive us for that." "I've already forgiven you, but forgiving you doesn't mean I'm going to repeat the same patterns that hurt my kids." The truth is, watching Dean deal with the fallout of his own choices didn't give me the satisfaction I might have expected, but it did give me a lot of clarity about why leaving when I did had been the right call. The final blow-up came almost exactly a year after Elijah was born, 7 months. Dad called me at work, which he'd never once done, and I knew right away, "You need to come. I live in your mother's house. I need your help." "What exactly do you think I can fix?" "Everything," he said, and the desperation in his voice was impossible. "Ever since you left, everything's been falling apart. Your mother cries every day. Dean can't handle his own responsibilities. We're all miserable. That evening, against my better judgment, I drove out to my parents' place for what they called an emergency family meeting. Dean was there, looking beat down in a way I'd never seen on him. Mum's eyes were red from crying, and Dad seemed to have aged another 5 years since September. "Thank you for coming," Mum said, like I'd done them some huge favor just showing up to my own family's crisis. "What's this about?" I asked, sitting down in what used to be my chair at the kitchen table. "It's about us needing you," Dad said flat out. "This family doesn't work without you." I looked around at 3 grown adults sitting there waiting for me to fix problems I hadn't caused. "Explain what you mean by that." Dean finally spoke up. "I can't do this alone," he said. "The divorce, the custody schedule with Elijah, managing the renovation, keeping up with work. I'm drowning. I need help." "What kind of help?" "The kind you always gave," Mum said. "You were always the organized one, the responsible. You knew how to handle a mess and keep everybody on track. Let me make sure I've got this right. For 7 months now, you've all been figuring out that your lives are a lot harder without me managing everything, doing free labor, and now you want me back doing that same job." "It's not like that," Dad said. "Then what is it like?" "It's like we're family," Mum said, "and families help each other. Families also respect each other," I said back. "They think about each other's needs and feelings. They don't move kids into a basement and then act shocked when their mother has a problem." "We already apologized for that," Dean said. "No, you haven't. Not once. You explained it, justified it, made it smaller than it was, but you never actually said sorry for it." The silence went on way too long. "Fine," Dean finally said. "I'm sorry we moved your kids to the basement. I'm sorry we didn't ask you first. Is that what you want to hear?" "What I want," I said, standing up from the table, "is for you to actually understand why what you did was wrong. But you don't get that, do you? You're sorry it caused problems, not sorry it hurt my kids. Your kids are fine. They seem happy and confident when we see them. They're happy and confident because they live somewhere they matter, where their needs actually count, where they don't have to compete with a baby just to get basic respect." I walked over to the window, looked out at the backyard where Maya and Caleb used to play, back before it got too risky to make noise that might wake up Elijah. "You want to know what I learned there?" I asked, turning back around. "I learned I don't need this family nearly as much as this family needs me. I learned my kids, and I can build a genuinely happy life without constantly bending over backward for other people's bad choices and getting nothing back for it. What's not fair," I said, "is that for 35 years I've been the one in this family who sacrifices, who accommodates, who manages everybody else's messes while my own needs get brushed off as inconvenient. What's not fair is my kids learning to see themselves as less important than their cousin because the adults around them taught them that lesson every single day. So you'll never help us again. No matter what happens, I'll help you the way family's supposed to help each other, with mutual respect, clear boundaries, and actually considering everyone involved. But I will never again sacrifice my kids' well-being for your convenience. And if we can't live with that, then I guess you'll figure out how to solve your own problems, same as I figured out how to solve mine." I drove home and found the twins doing homework at our kitchen table, their artwork all over the fridge, their voices filling up a house where they knew, without question, that they belonged. That was the last family meeting I ever went to. Over the months after that, I heard through relatives that Dean eventually moved back into his half-renovated house, figured out how to manage his own custody schedule, and slowly picked up the adult skills he'd never needed while everyone else was handling his life for him. Nora remarried somebody with better prospects, and Elijah split his time between 2 homes where he was actually wanted, instead of being used as a weapon in some family power struggle. My parents learned to cook for 2 again, learned to run their own household without free help, and found things to fill their time that didn't depend on their kids being available to do their emotional labor for them. As for me, I got promoted again, bought some better furniture for the house, and started seeing a genuinely kind man who thinks my independence is attractive instead of something to be threatened by. The twins just call him by his and seem to like having another adult who respects their space and their opinion. We still see my parents now and then, but it's on our turn, with clear expectations and real boundaries. They've learned that time with their grandkid with a price, treating their grandkid and their mother with basic sometimes. But then I watch Maya up on stage or watch Caleb score a goal at basketball, and I remember the best that he valued, not for how much. That lesson